Thank you for attending today's webinar, Build Detection That Lasts, Streamline Integration and Reduce Detection Time, brought to you by SOC Prime and Corelight. At the end of today's presentation, we will have a Q&A session. So if you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the question tab. And with that, I'll hand things over to our first presenter, James Schweitzer.
Excellent, thank you very much, Ed. Good morning, everyone. My name is James. We're here to talk about SOC Prime. First, I want to take a moment to talk about the agenda. We'll introduce ourselves, then we'll go over some specifics of what Corelight can do to assist with this, as well as SOC Prime, some great Sigma detections. We've got a lot of technical detail that Nate's going to provide pretty soon. And then we'll open it up and provide you opportunities to say, these are open source testing capabilities that exist. So you're not purely dependent on someone else. There's a lot that you can do out there. With that, I'll start with the introduction. I'll introduce myself. My name is James Schweitzer. I've been with Corelight for 2.5 years. I lead the East and Federal SEs, and prior to that, I spent 11 years with the MITRE Corporation, supporting various government agencies in the Security Center. Nate, to hand it to you.
Yep, thanks, James. I didn't know that's how you actually pronounce your last name. I've known you, for 5 or 6 years, so after the call, I have to get that on recording again. But yeah, I'm Nate Guagenti, probably better known as Neutron on Twitter, but spent a lot of time working in DoD and then some healthcare, and then last 2 years, living a good life in the private sector. Yeah, contributor to HELK, OSIM, the schema. HELK is, threat hunting, like ELK stack, different add-ons, and then Sigma. Just wear multiple hats, mostly related around threat research and data engineering. I guess is the best way to describe myself.
Excellent. Thanks, Nate. It's gonna be a great broadcast. And Andre?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today. So, yeah, if you think your last name is hard to pronounce, try mine. Yeah, my name is Andre Bezverki. I'm originally from Ukraine, as more known as a founder and CEO of SOC Prime companies. So, mostly focused on bringing detection as a code to the masses and taking Sigma big with our threat detection marketplace. So, yeah, glad to be with you today. I mean, a few words about myself. I'm officially in information security since 2007. Learned to work with probably 15 different SIEM technologies, and then EDRs. And these days, we are really helping to drive Sigma to automate deployment of the rules and again drive the open source detections. So I'll be speaking briefly today, mostly about the latest US CERT alert and some Corelight and content to detect the APT41 and other Chinese actors attacks. And a little bit of zero logout, but mostly here to be with you guys and maybe to comment on a few of your questions.
Excellent, thanks, Andre. So with that, I'll go ahead and start us off talking about Corelight. For folks who may not be familiar, Corelight is the enterprise implementation of Zeek. Zeek is a framework that was invented by Vern Paxson almost 20 years ago. Vern is one of the 3 co-founders of Corelight. The other 2 co-founders had been leading the open source project for over a decade. And what they decided and recognized is they have a tradecraft, and they really wanted to do something to make it easier for folks to be able to monitor networks. So they wouldn't spend time building the sensor, they'd be able to concentrate in the data. So Corelight really is a tradecraft in enriching data. The 2 that I'll mention briefly to talk about are what we call our encrypted traffic collection. Recognizing that more and more traffic on the internet is encrypted, Corelight is saying this is still data that is readily available even though traffic is encrypted, whether it's an SSH connection or a TLS connection to go through. For example, we've looked through and can tell if you have an SSH connection, is that SSH connection interactive, or is it being used to upload or download files? Making it easier to assess if somebody is trying to abuse what's otherwise, a trusted vehicle in order to maintain and communicate with your network infrastructure. Another item you'll see is an integration with Suricata. And you may look at that and say, well, there have been plenty of folks that have deployed solutions that have Suricata with Zeek. And that's true. The difference in this case is Corelight has actually integrated the 2. So what Corelight has done is we've combined contents from the Eve log with the material from our connections log to create one. And by doing that, we're really making it very simple, or it's not simple, easier for analysts to, when they discover an alert, to quickly go get the related data, whether you're doing that through your dashboard, pivoting within your SIEM, or if you have orchestration built into your platform. But if you're unfamiliar really with Zeek, think of us similar to Snort to SourceFire and Nessus to Tenable. There are things that you can do in the open source, but the commercial instantiation wants to make it easier. And I like to have that example to power tools. I worked for a carpenter through college, and when you have a power tool, it's amazing the things that you can do, how you can do things faster and easier, but there are downsides. If you're not careful, it's very easy with a nail gun that you could shoot through your hand, through your finger. So it's like any tool. If you know how to use it and use it properly, it can be incredibly effective and make your job easier. And that's really what Corelight wants to focus is. We want to be sure that we're making things easier for our customers to monitor traffic, get that traffic where it needs to be. So I'll give you 1 second to kind of read this. It's a pretty dense statement, but it really summarizes what Corelight is. We're a data-centric solution. And with that, we want to be sure that we enhance folks that deploy automation tools. We do that because we transform the information into logs and we can extract files. We really support an existing ecosystem within your SOC. With this, we really provide insights to multiple personnel, whether they're threat hunters or incident responders, and we'll give you some specific examples of that, as we move through and talk about how we partner with SOC Prime. When you look, I'm sure many people on the call are going to say, I already have a lot of security data. I have security tools that generate logs. I have host data coming in, it goes into a SIEM, and I have threat intel. What exactly can you offer me, Corelight? Network data, what makes network data, valuable? And we look and say, really, it's understanding all aspects of your environment. So many folks or many organizations that may have network traffic today, it's sampled or it's incomplete. And really that doesn't paint a very good picture. It's kind of trying to answer a question where you only hear the first kind of initial statement and the closing remark. You don't hear anything in the middle for context. It makes it very difficult to understand what's going on and how can you react appropriately. So Corelight takes that and says, we're going to give you comprehensive evidence on any segment. And the way we do that is through generating logs. Now, sorry, the graphic is a little smaller than I wanted it to be, but what we wanted to demonstrate with this is anything that traverses the network generates a log, whether it's a Microsoft DCER PC coming through for remote procedure call, Kerberos, or Modbus if you're in an ICS environment. But the challenge you have is you could say, well, I already have some of those logs, but were those logs designed for incident responders? Were they designed for security personnel? What Corelight has done, and really Zeek and Vern, when he invented this, is they transform the traffic and they transform it to provide context. Everything centers around the connection log. So if you're familiar with NetFlow, the connection log is very similar to that, but has a lot of additional content. The con log summarizes a connection between two endpoints, and it has, information, source, dest, IP address, ports, the duration, but it also has a couple of interesting items. One is the history field. So that's a summary of the TCP control flags. So you have freedom to really look to see if I have a TCP window size of 0, do I have a SYN followed by a reset where somebody's trying to do reconnaissance on my network, or maybe I have a daemon that's died. All of that's available in the con, but that only tells part of the story. When we look, we parse the protocols to tell you exactly what it is, and we don't look on the port. We actually have dynamic protocol detection to go through and look at it and say, this is a DNS session, this is the DNS information. Similarly, you see HTTP and FTP. Each one of those is its own independent log, and there'll be a corresponding connections log. What we continue to do to make it easier is if there are files that are exchanged across that FTP transaction or HTTP transaction, there's a files log. And we're going to give you specific traits about the file. hashes, name, how it was transported. All this information is readily available within your SIEM to be able to pivot on, and you can see the entirety of the session. But you're going to look and say, well, that's great that you do it for FTP and HTTP, but what about when I have lots of traffic that's encrypted? Well, there are many logs that we have for encrypted traffic, whether it's SSH or SSL, someday we'll rename it TLS, the SSL log and X509 log. Those two really work together. So the SSL log is going to tell you information about the handshake. What's the protocol that's in use? Or what's the cipher? Tell me about the key exchange. What do I know about this? The X509 is going to say, is this the first time I've seen this certificate? Have I seen it 10 times? What's the chain of trust? Together, those two tell a story about the encrypted traffic connection that's very valuable to understand what's going in and out of your network. Similarly for SSH, as I mentioned earlier, we can tell you if a session is interactive or if it has directionality for file upload and download. But we also offer fingerprinting for those connections. So you have a way to data stack within your environment to see if you have new SSH servers or clients appearing. But what if you're not interested in that? What if you're an ICS environment? We have Modbus, BACnet, 7 other protocols that we support, out of the box to be able to enable. Or if you're primarily concerned with Microsoft, as I think more and more people are, the Kerberos log, SMB for server message block, when files are moved around from shares, knowing when it was accessed, who accessed it, did they delete it? So you have a historical record. All this information is available, but there are a few other items. We have up in the far left a notice log. I mentioned earlier that Corelight is part of the Zeek framework. You can write your own custom observations or custom detections and generate a notice. The MITRE Corporation actually wrote one they call Bazaar for the Zeek Analytics repository, where it's an application that looks and generates notices when it sees behavior that is known bad, based on the MITRE TAC framework. And also weird. A weird log is, if something doesn't look right, maybe it doesn't follow an RFC, it's going to fire and show the weird. But if you look at all of this and say, okay, James, it's great that you told me about all of these logs, but all you've done is give me a big soup sandwich of data. How does that help? What Corelight does and what Zeek does is we have a unique identifier. And so what you'll see that just came on the screen is when you have a DNS transaction, a workstation goes out for a query and comes back, you can follow that with that unique identifier and you can see everything related to it. Similar with your HTTP log or your Kerberos. It makes it much easier for an analyst to understand what happened in their environment. But how do we get that data? Corelight makes it easy. With our data export, we can send to one or more of your SIEM solutions. Exporting that data, we receive it because we've got it coming from a tap or a span. We send it out to the data lake or the SIEM, or we can also extract files. But this is really where the challenge comes in. We're going to provide you with that good foundational data, but it's what you do with the data in your analytics platform. And with that, I'll pass it up to Andre.
Hey, actually, I wanted to say something. James, you jumped back 2 slides on the UID.
Sure.
Sorry, Andre, on that transition intercept. But just to expand on this, like from a analysis perspective, or somebody using the data. So the UID is really interesting. It's a way to actually like do joins, right? So take multiple logs and put them together as one. So what in a normal log source you might have like 40 fields, or certain amount of characteristics for one connection, right? So with this, it's allowing you to pivot or join, what ends up being like 100 different or more values or characteristics or things that you can, search on, use for creating detections and so forth. And then real quick on the Modbus industrial control system, I think it's really interesting. Like even Amazon, is using Zeek, Zeek with, this sort of stuff. So, I know we might all have opinions on Amazon, but I think it speaks volumes that, a company like that is using something like this to monitor ICS. So, but again, yeah, having all this in a SIEM, jumping back to the next two slides and giving it back to Andre, right? Kind of what do you do with all this data?
Excellent. And actually, we actually have a comment kind of in the questions tab. It's almost like a transform of a PCAP in an event with many fields. And that's absolutely the case. What we're trying to do is really tell folks that it can be a lot simpler to conduct an analysis, so you don't have to go to the PCAP every time you have to conduct an investigation. Really, the PCAP becomes, it's still important, but it becomes much less important as you conduct the investigation.
Yeah, I
Okay,
mean,
Andre.
expand on the PCAP, like, I mean, if you think about it, having worked in incident response, like a lot of time we were only using, PCAP, say it was a attack against a web server or some sort of completely encrypted connection you're somehow finding like the cipher and then taking PCAP to like decrypt it or something, right? It's pretty rare that you're moving to PCAP that often. And even if you are, right, like you should be able to make a vast amount of your decisions or answer a vast amount of your questions, like without having to go to that, right? Like as a friend of mine put it, Zeek's kind of like the Goldilocks of network data, right? You have alerts on one side, Zeek in the middle, and then on the right side you have PCAP, so it's somewhere in between, kind of the sweet spot. So again, pass it to Andre. I think third time's a charm. I won't intercept you.
Okay, yeah. I just figure out how to share the screen and then I'll be ready to proceed. Oh, and thank you for assistance. So
yeah, go to meeting is new for me sometimes.
So many software versions have to use like Teams and GoToMeeting and Google Meet. And
did a webinar with a company 2 weeks ago, and I started the webcast an hour before. I think one of them's on the call, so I can't hear you laughing, but yeah, I started the webcast an hour before as we were warming up testing. So
just excited.
We are live. Yep.
Yeah. So can you see my screen? TDM
yes.
stuff.
Yeah, looks good.
Great. So yeah, for those on the webinar who are not maybe familiar with TDM or threat detection marketplace, this is pretty much a way of delivering detection rules and queries through a crowdsourced and marketplace style platform. So it is SaaS, and you can sign in pretty much with your Gmail address or your corporate address and get access to Sigma rules and different content. So yeah, pretty much these days it's called detection as a code. Maybe if you read the latest article by Anton Chirakin or by Augusto Barros from Chronicles, Acronics respectively, they're saying that we're pretty much under the stage where detections have been rolled as a code, which I think is how detections were always created. Just we literally went from making like some tens of them to hundreds and then to thousands a month if you translate to different platforms. Just to give you a demonstration of capability, so we go to Corelight rules now. So it would mean all the signal translations we have, which are complementary with Zeek and Corelight. We just order them by release date. By the way, since we're doing a webinar today, we only decided it would be great to roll out some more rules. So we have about 138 of them, and most of them are really fresh, updated this day. And the best part is that, yeah, 452 of them are community access, meaning you can get them absolutely for free, no strings attached, and that's usually how we roll our platform.
So Andre, I just wanted to mention, so it's 138 like specific to Zeek logs, right? I'll talk about it a little bit more later, but if you have something like a proxy or an HTTP category, that's going to apply to Zeek as well. But so there's a lot more than just that, but those are specific. These are good ones. So
of course, yes. And I mean, this is because when we're making detection rules, we pretty much, the art in science is not only to detect the latest attack to exploit or a tool, but it's also making sure that it flies in the environment that you're dealing with, right? You're protecting. And then you may not necessarily have every single log from every single host, every single app, but very often if you have network monitoring in place, right? If you have packet data like PCAPs and Corelight data, then you can find things on network. And from a defense perspective, the earlier the better, right? If you talk about kind of coverage and MITRE attack, like we have this page where we map everything to MITRE, and I know there's a great resource on the Corelight website which explains which techniques are detectable using Corelight logs, but even if you look at our coverage, means that the rules are being tagged explicitly to detect these techniques using Corelight. And like you could say, oh, how do I actually detect credentialed app and using Corelight? Well, if we click here, go to rules, we would say, yeah, remote in-packet detection using Zeek data is one example, right? If you talk about exploit detection, and go here and say zero logon, right? Which is probably stressing this every day, but cannot stress it enough. The zero logon detection rule. The first one we rolled out is using Zeek data, and it got already 1,300 downloads, which feels like a lot, but I think it's not enough because like who is using the RPC and who is vulnerable to this vulnerability, right? So it makes me really happy that already many people downloaded it, but like it's a free rule, just go ahead and use it. There's like nothing to consider, and like that's one example. Another example is if we just step away from MITRE ATT&CK and talk about the latest stuff. Probably all read the US CERT alert yesterday, right? The AA2027-5A. And what we did this morning is mapped all the content we have to the threat actors in China. So if you're talking about APT actor by name or by tools they're using like Poison Ivy, Mimikatz, and others, or particular vulnerabilities, and one of them is F5, right? Which hopefully everybody deployed detection for and patched back in summer. But if you have not, or if the cycle of patching is longer in your organization, you can just click any of those tools and say, okay, what do we have to detect this? And here we have Yara rules, Snort rules, Sigma rules, which can then be applied to an environment. And yeah, I think I have not exactly counted how much content we have, but I have asked our engineering team to share a Lucene query with us. So in TDM, you can search it in Lucene if you're familiar with it. So pretty much listed everything here. And you arrive at pretty much 152 unique Sigma rules, and then all of them are sorted by priority. So it means if we see that rules are becoming more popular, if there is any kind of external threat intelligence talking about this actor or attack or tool or CVE being exploited, would automatically recommend them to the top. And actually, I sorted out by release here, but let me switch to recommended. Yeah, so here we are. And then a way to test it on Corelight platform. I think Nate, you will dive more into that, but it's as simple as kind of going here, selecting platform, click Corelight, you'll see what will work particularly with Corelight logs. Yeah, and there we go. There are 44 rules that you can apply right away. Yeah, so pretty much think about the capability. It's not anymore about writing rules and crafting detection and testing it across many environments, because it's like SOC Prime doesn't make all of that content, right? We have a great community of people who contribute into threat bounty. We also have Sigma repository where everybody who contributes to Sigma posts their rules there. And we pretty much index them and provide additional translations and support on top. So yeah, that's what I want to share. And over to you, Nate, for more details. And thank you.
Yep. Could you share the slides or there? Yeah. Ed or James, do you have the slides? Or should I just share my screen for the slides?
I just made you said.
What's that?
You're your presenter now.
Yeah, okay, no worries. All right, so yeah, thanks James and Andre. So I'm gonna dive a little bit, I guess I do in presentation mode, but yeah, dive a little bit more into technical details. So for the people on the call that were waiting for that aspect, I guess I'm your person. So yeah, I mean, James talked about it a little bit maybe, and I think I mentioned it even with industrial control system and SCADA. But yeah, network security monitoring, a lot of people talk about that endpoint is like the only way or best way and everything else. So I think we all realize everybody's environment is different. So anytime I hear any sort of 100% or absolute saying, as I like to say, or Star Wars says, only the Sith deal in absolutes. So anybody telling you something as 100% in this field, right, should probably be wary. But there's a lot of devices that endpoint can't cover one of my best friends like came from an environment where there's monitoring ATMs. Like sometimes you can't just go and install, an EDR agent or start collecting every single Windows log or some sort of like critical healthcare device. So, I know people are pretty paranoid about BIOS and chip level, but for some people, it's necessary, right? You're not going to be able to use an endpoint for that. So I think there's a lot of situations that this is necessary, say for most organizations, having the data that like Corelight and Zeek provide. But big one also is just execution, over the wire. So somebody just making a connection to a device, and from there being able to create code or run, command prompt or do something on the device, right? Without even technically logging in or something else. So 0 day or some sort of exploit, usually what people are thinking. So great. We see it's useful, right? And so again, my portion is going to be, trying to connect the SIEM, the data that Zeek provides, giving the perspective from somebody who's spent a lot of time, threat hunting, working in incident response, and then just data engineering, which I think is I'll get into, touch on a little bit. But yeah, I mean, for 22 years, the network security community, just network monitoring, NDR, whatever you want to call it, I'll just say NSM for this talk, has only had like IDS rules, right? So having Sigma, having this ability, you can share rules, right? You're starting to see a lot more people use Sigma and share, like even enterprise, companies like recently saw F-Secure, antivirus companies sharing Sigma rules, which I thought was really cool. Retro Hunt, I think this is something that's not talked about a lot. And I think when I was building the Zeek Sigma integration, I got, I wouldn't say pushback, but I got a good amount of disbelief, like in Sigma with Zeek. I can write this as Corelight, Zeek, just going to use the words interchangeably, but I can write this as a Zeek, script. That's great. Yes, you can, but let's say something was happening for a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 years, right? That didn't have that Zeek script, or it wasn't an IDS rule or whatever it was, right? You can basically use Sigma and these TDM rules and that sort of stuff to retroactively hunt. So I don't know if Andre touched on it completely. I'll mention it later, but like the zero login, it was like 48 hours, the rule written before like a POC, working exploit, and those sort of things. But who knows if somebody's using it before that? You could run that rule for a month and those sort of things. So community, talk about that some, but obviously, you have community and support, which I think is big. I think it's most similar, right, to something like emerging threat or snort rules. So you got free and then paid, So I think that's critical. And then the gap that this bridges, that's huge for me working on schemas for data parsing and those sort of things, right, and again, nothing's perfect, but as I say, like this gets you a heck of a lot farther, a heck of a lot faster than literally anything else was. Whether you're managing multiple versions of a schema, using multiple databases and those sort of things, this helps alleviate those issues with somebody calling one field one thing and somebody else calling it another. So one of the most common things like I like to give with that is just IP addresses. Some of these are from Suricata, some of these are from Zeek, some of these are from firewalls. Right here you have almost 6 or 7 variations. But then if you want to add like Windows logs or something else like that, I've seen like over 18 different fields. And I built like a common schema for like over 6 years, or more, right? Contributing to OSINT being one, and then trying to map to one of the most recent ones. But like you're never going to be 100% in your schema. So having some sort of flexibility to take like a field in its original field name and then convert it to whatever you have or as you progress, as I think is huge. That's not talked about a lot, but jumping to the open source, right? So we know Sigma's common language for detections and search. I like to call it detection logic versus rules, and I'll talk about that later. With the log possibilities, you have infinite. But touching on the community aspect, you know, HELK, the hunting elk, security onion, you know, I've seen MITRE attack. You know, there's a lot of open source folks and projects that, you know, have been behind Sigma and the belief in it and those sort of things. I mean, I think you see that with enterprise companies as well, with Google Chronicle and Azure Sentinel and those sort of things, like taking part in this. So I guess we're here to talk mostly, right, about Zeek, Corelight rules. You know, James, what, there are 50 logs or more, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean 50 logs, and people are constantly adding logs and making things better, adding like Amazon releasing those, you know, 3 or 4 industrial control system log types, right? So
and not only that, well,
yeah.
sorry, you say not only that, but also the thing you can do is the logs are extensible. So if there's a new field, there's something that you want to capture, you know, because there's a Turing complete scripting language as part of the solution, you can extend and add that information. So now you have it for the future.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So that's a good point. I actually did that with a field called request origin header, not to drag people through the weeds or the mud too much in technical details, but is a field in an HTTP request that would basically log the Chrome extension unique ID that you can take that UID and actually look it up on the Chrome store. This is really interesting for me because a lot of administrative tasks are performed like in the browser, remote desktop services you're accessing, you know, a lot of things are like thin apps or VM apps being accessed in the browser. So like for me, you don't even necessarily need to run malware, you're just running a malicious Chrome extension. But when a Chrome extension makes a connection, it's logged in that field, right? So before Zeek, and sorry if there's ever, if you guys can hear people mowing the lawn, but who's ever, until Zeek had added it in the main repo, right, that was something that, you know, I was pretty easily able to extend. So is the background noise pretty bad or not?
No, it's fine.
Okay. All right, so zero login remote execution things over the wire. You know, I think being able to monitor critical systems like Active Directory and those sort of like DNS servers, Windows servers, and those sort of things, like even if you have all the best endpoint logging and EDR and everything else, like if you're able to just execute code before actually physically, you know, touching the device, keyboard or something like that, just sending literally a packet. You know, I think it speaks for itself, but you know, there's a big company that builds these operating systems, right, that acquired basically a company that sole purpose was to sit off of a domain controller and monitor it. Zero and Zeek Corelight is something that gives you that ability, right, as well. You know, and a community behind it and those sort of things. So what I'm trying to get at is there's definitely a necessity, right, for even if the best endpoint logging having, you know, this passive, unbiased like data source, or just something that you know is going to log, whether there's some magical evasion or technique that they're using, right? Got to communicate across the network at some point. So this is just a screenshot, right, of the conversion to a Splunk query. So, you know, you could click the tab, search in Splunk, or just copy and paste this, whatever your prerogative is, you know, API, that sort of stuff. But the ability to run this, you know, just take universal format for Sigma and then, you know, just dump it into something, let's say Splunk, and detect and be able to detect this threat, I think is, I don't know, James, you say something that's not really been possible before?
Totally.
Yeah, I mean DCERPC, which is what this log source, this rule is based off of. I think James will talk about some of that initiative in the community later on in detection, in people capturing that data source later on. But essentially what DCRPC is anytime like a domain controller or some other Windows server is being communicated to or communicating from using some of like that built-in Active Directory functions, like what group does a user belong to? You know, let me find that out on the domain controller, you know, and I'm trying to query that remotely across the network. Like that will be logged within Zeek. So, James,
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I think the key piece of this is, you know, the adversary wants to look like administrative traffic. So this is something that's going to be seen. And if they elevate and compromise an account, they can use that against you. They're going to hide within the noise. Having the ability to parse out and look at the operations, you know, and the endpoints of what's taking place really will help you, you know, as you hunt through to say, is this a legitimate activity? Was this being performed from a legitimate workstation by a legitimate admin? You know, otherwise it's really like trying to, you know, find a needle in a, you know, not just one haystack, you know, 10 haystacks.
Yep, exactly. And, you know, again, aiding and even getting you there to that point, or, you know, I'll show later on like more broad, but built around like a tactic, right? So this is built around obviously a specific exploit, you know, talking about something more broad in terms of tactic or technique, like just enumerating Active Directory earlier. I kind of hinted at it, right? But this is something that APT 29, you know, adversarial simulation that Roberto, a friend of mine in open threat research community, did. I think it's the same one that MITRE had did the eval, some of the, you know, EDR or other SIEMs, you know, but he took a variation of that and did that, right? So captured the PCAP, ran Zeek on it, took those Zeek logs, started writing rules. You know, you could use this as an APT 29 detection, right? But the reason I like this is enumerating, once you have a user, right, enumerating what groups they belong to, other privileges and other things that you'd be able to gain from that user's account, right? Like it's something everybody at some point in the kill chain or attack phase is going to be a necessity. So this is a pretty broad, you know, sweep across the Zeek logs and DCRPC. Again, yeah,
I was going to add something to that to say, you know, oftentimes whenever we think of adversaries in our networks, we think of them as like a cat burglar, very swift, you know, nimbly moving around, when in reality, they're kind of like Mr. Magoo, bumbling and stumbling as they try and learn to understand what's in there. And so if you're instrumented so that you can see these things, it makes it a lot easier for us to defend the networks when they're stumbling around trying to discover, you know, what is the group, what is the user that I can exploit? Sorry, Nate.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, it's not like on every single laptop in a domain or every single computer in a domain is every other computer name and every other user in all their roles, right? Like they get access, they compromise a device, they have to go and search and figure out parts of the network, right? Just as if anybody else, you know, a new employee or like network diagram and those sort of things, like you're reading those, they're reading the network to figure out more. You know, I won't touch on this too much, but Zeek Corelight captures syslog data. So, you know, even if you're writing like rules around Linux, or in this scenario is Cisco ASA log, you know, you can apply, you know, the certain Sigma rules, or you can start to write your own, or just explore those sort of things. But being able to write like a query on a log within a log, right? Or maybe you just can't get anybody to send you syslog data to your SIEM, but you could use something like Zeek passively if that data is already being collected in Zeek and ingest on your SIEM, and kind of, got to get creative in this field. So they're not sending you logs, but you're passively capturing them. You pretty much solved your problem. We got 5 minutes or 10? We're to the hour, top?
Yeah, it's top of the hour.
Okay, all right, well, I'm fine then. So web attacks, I don't, early 2000s, like this got a lot of, publicity or kind of interest. I think it's kind of phased out over the last few years. I don't know whether, it's an understanding of JavaScript, which I don't know if anybody does, but in the last year or two, the reports that I've seen, like web compromise, web attacks, has started to become more common, being, I think, in the top 25% of way of access. I think phishing is still a thing, still probably be always a thing, right? But I was pretty shocked to see in the last year or two that number of web server compromises spike again. I think we've seen that a lot in VPNs, especially. I think that's become more obvious to defenders, right? A VPN device is essentially just a web server, or Citrix web app and those sort of things.
And I would add to that, Nate, there's actually another protocol analyzer that was written for Zeek and Corelight that looks and parses the IKE v2 protocol, and it looks for folks that are trying to conduct an exploit against the VPN server. So again, so you can use the talent of your SIEM with the raw, normalized data set coming from Corelight to see if you have somebody trying to do something in your VPN that they shouldn't.
Yep. And did you mention the protocol analyzer that somebody had written, or the rule?
Yes. The protocol analyzer.
Yeah, I think you just mentioned that in the last few days. That's something I'd like to start exploring, see different, rules potentially around that. What did you say it was? Basically, ciphers used in ordering and those sort of things
Yes.
for the VPN. Yeah. I mean, theoretically, what it's doing, right, is just baselining, like all your clients should kind of be using the same VPN, like not the same version, but just like any connector, something else like that. Trying to exploit a VPN, they're probably going to use some Python library or something else. So sounds really interesting to start building detections around. But this is just a screenshot of some of HTTP data. Kind of built this rule a while ago on OWASP, cross-site scripting. Most commonly, people see it as like script.alert1, right? But I think there's 100 or 200 variations of that same sort of like script.alert, but using mouse over. Anyways, without getting in the weeds too much, there's a lot of interesting things going on in web server attacks. So again, this is, like, you're not going to expect all your analysts or, like me, I don't have time to go and learn how to program a website, right? So that's, again, the whole point of like Sigma, to hit the ground running or be able to help, even if it's, an hour, 10 hours, or 40 hours of somebody's time in a year, right, of some sort of new thing that they don't have to learn. And this is kind of one of them, right? So before I get into showing like some of the Sigma rules, and again, I just said it, detection logics, whatever, like biggest thing about Sigma is just a rule. I'll show you rules where it's not a rule, right? Like just an exact match, I guess is what I want to call it. There's people always want something that's like 100%. Again, as I said, I think for the third time, but when I first started talking, like there is nothing that is 100%. I think that's started to be shown with insider threats, right? Where the only difference between a legitimate user and an insider threat is intent, right? Like I have an administrative PowerShell function that queries, my whole network to get an inventory list. What if somebody malicious was using that same script? Like, oh, wow, there's a script an admin wrote to query the network to find all the computers and everything else. It'd be very useful for an attacker. It's, it started as a legitimate script. The legitimate admins still use it. But if somebody's maliciously using it, how would you know with like any sort of log, right? Where you provide context and those sort of things, and that's exactly like you're getting into intent of what that person was trying to do by adding more data, right? And then biggest thing I view malicious actors as is they are trying to become a legitimate user. So I think over time we've seen more and more, even just like threat actors reusing tools that everybody else is using. I know it's been a hot button topic I'm not going to get into, but basically the gist is everybody's end goal, malicious threat actors, right, is basically become an insider, so kind of viewing them, their end goal is the same. And then malicious threat actors are trying to blend in as every other threat actor. So Sigma isn't just a rule, and there's aggregations and sort of time, like certain amount of events in XYZ time. But biggest thing is like providing this like a retro hunt, right? You got an idea, go and run the query. I don't want to say threat hunting because it's not really, some sort of like scientific degree, right? Like you start with an idea, you run it on your network, figure out what's legitimate and what's probably suspicious, and you just baseline, what's legitimate, and then what surfaces to the top is malicious or illegitimate or should be investigated. So Sigma, right, can exact matches or detections, right, doing retro hunts or threat hunting. So with web servers, this is really useful because there's usually more than one thing going on, or they're repeatedly, poking a web server. I'll wrap up in a couple minutes, James. Hand it back off to you. But big one, pretty simple one, right? Just somebody's going to poke a web server. The goal is for it to kind of error out, most of the time error out, and give a verbose amount of information. People, normally see, like, most commonly think of it with like an SQL injection, right? There's probably some sort of 500 error, or like people are seeing stack traces, type in the wrong thing, and it's like, oh wow, they're running Python, and here's the Python script name behind the web server and everything else like that. So this is an aggregation, basically looking for this multiple times, from multiple different IPs in a certain amount of time, right? So somebody poking at a web server. And again, this could have false positives, right? But should be pretty easy to filter out like what's the legitimate source IPs, and then just kind of move from there. The rules around, right, VPNs, work from home, remote services, Citrix, NetScaler, attack. There's just a lot of rules already written, a lot of rules that could be, like specific to your environment that you might want to add. But to get you started, there's a good amount of stuff, for web attacks, existing web server or VPN exploits and those sort of things. So James, something back over to you.
Okay, excellent. So I did see we did have a kind of a question to start off and say, is there a possibility to get access to the demo? And I think, Andre, it's a free sign up for folks to have access to the SOC Prime TDM, correct?
Yes, absolutely. It's tdm.socprime.com. You can sign up with a free email address like Gmail. And at any point of time, you can also change the corporate address, which will give you like, I think, over 30,000 community items you can explore. So, yeah.
Okay,
absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you. So really just a couple slides left. One I wanted to talk to, and it's very complementary, is kind of called the Corelight Quick Response Team. So what you see on the screen are some very recent examples of exploits that happened, and usually it was within 12 to 24 hours. Corelight was able to release a package that you could run on Zeek that could identify that then you could have access to and use for detections within your environment. And while this is fantastic, and we're glad as Corelight to provide this, I think a more important point, if you get at the next slide, Nate, goes through and goes around, other opportunities that you have to kind of live and learn. Mordor is a great open source project that exists today. Within this project, what you have is you have the capability to kind of rerun where there's pre-recorded security events. These events were generated from simulated adversary techniques, and it's produced to be easily consumable. So what you see in the top right, there are PCAPs, there are Zeek logs. That information, that data is there for you to be able to learn. So really it's about, kind of live in the now, live in the environment, understand what some of these exploits are, but Mordor's not alone. I think if you hit, again, Nate, one more, it'll show PCAP attack. So PCAP attack is another, and there are other tools that are available. So you could use open source Zeek. If you're interested, you can actually go to try.zeek.org. You could upload a PCAP, see what it looks like. Security Onion is another open source tool that has implementations of Zeek as well as Elastic and Suricata, or HELK. As Nate mentioned earlier, hunting with Elastic and Logstash, Jupyter Notebooks. It's really the combination of everything for the analyst. So it's all there for you as you want to learn and do more, where then, like we say, then Corelight steps in and can provide you additional content that's not otherwise available to you. And I think
I think the whole initiative, right, or the gist of kind of what I mean, like broader community, right, is like saving people time, saving people resources, things that people don't have, especially if you got kids or demanding boss or demanding job, right? Andre didn't look enthused about that joke, probably not listening, but is what you would have to do, right, to like collect a PCAP for an attack like this. I mean, Roberto, if anybody knows him, that person, he's the most thorough person you'll ever meet, right? Like he's saving people just 15, 20 hours or more, running a simulation like that, right? You have to set up the web servers. You have to make sure that you're capturing the traffic. You have to make sure that you're doing it correctly. You have to make sure that you're exporting the logs. Like it's exhausting, right? Then for people, again, like you might not have access to certain resources due to money, or just like, you work like me, I work night shift, like an IDS when I first started. And, I basically had to sit, like a puppy dog in the morning when the, day people, the quote unquote smart people came in to like ask them to have access to systems, like to see this additional data and do other things, right? Like, this sort of stuff allows you to just do this, at home. I think that is an awesome thing about this field. Like you don't have to work for a multi-billion-dollar organization with all the latest and greatest, next gen this and that costs $1 million or more to be able to do your own learning and exploration, right? And then being able to share Sigma rules, being able to run, a flavor of Corelight, for free, and those sort of things. So, it all plays together, right?
Definitely. And I'd add to that point where you mentioned about saving time. I think that's another point that we may have mentioned it briefly, but people oftentimes have more than one SIEM, or they're transitioning from one SIEM. And while Corelight can send data concurrently to more than one location, if your analysts aren't fluent in multiple SIEM languages, that's really where Sigma comes in. That's where SOC Prime makes it very easy for folks to be able to transition. So you have good normalized data, and you have a means for your analysts to, deftly navigate between various SIEMs.
Well, and that's, that's exactly right. Like the webinar, build detections that last. So you kind of softballed that, James. I don't know if you did it on purpose or not, but we plan to mention it at some point. I wasn't going to treat it like a movie where within the first 5 minutes of the movie they mention the title of the movie in some way, right? But building detections that last, right? So Sigma rules being written to the original log source. So as long as that log source exists, that logic is going to be applicable. I don't see endpoint going away like anytime soon. I don't see network going away anytime soon, unless we just get rid of IPv4 and get rid of Windows and get rid of Linux. Don't see that going away, right? So you're writing rules that are going to last. You're writing rules in logic and using data right? That's impactful, because nobody really has time, especially in this industry. Like some people, probably one person in a SOC, or you're like me at one point doing the threat hunting, training people, and then also simultaneously doing the parsing and building out the SIEM. You know, having something like this, even like I said, to save an hour of your time, you know, is, yeah, I think it speaks for itself.
Definitely, and I would say, and that, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go, please continue.
I was going to say that leads us really, I think, into one of the things that Corelight actually provides on the next slide is an opportunity in the community where we offer a treasure hunt, a capture the flag. And it's free to anyone who wants to come in. And our goal with this is, if you hit the next slide, Nate, was to show that, you know, when you visit the Corelight site, you can see what is available to you in the network. You know, and actually last year we actually had a tournament of champions kind of coming through to determine who knew the network best. And each round the questions got progressively harder as you had to mine through the data set. We want to make this available because the better that people are at understanding and working with the data, the safer our networks are. And then you can build detections that last. Like that, Nate? You like that?
I did.
See, there was a smile.
That was good.
I see we had one other question in the question space saying, can we share detections that were uncovered with Corelight that were not caught by EDRs, for example? Saying, imagine a scenario where a company has a decent EDR deployed and Corelight in a proof of concept. You know, can we shed light on the dark arts taking place in the company? I'll start and then see if Nate, if you wanted to add any other remarks. I would look at that and say, EDR is very good. One of the challenges you have with EDR is coverage. I think as Nate mentioned earlier, some devices are too old. They may not have the compute power or be able to install an agent. Also in other environments is really when you see the bring your own. So if somebody brings their own laptop, brings their own device that connects to the corporate network, that's an area where an EDR doesn't really have visibility. The network is really going to be very complementary in that situation. Additionally, even with an EDR, one of the things one of my colleagues likes to say is detections are very often time late. And what we mean by that is if you know to look for something, that means someone's already found it because the adversary is working very hard to be uncovered, undiscovered. And so having kind of the network device sitting there listening, you can really do, as Nate mentioned earlier, kind of the retro hunt. You can look and see what's already transpired on your network.
Yeah.
You know, have I seen this before? I don't know, Nate, if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, no, absolutely. And just going off your last portion, right? I literally don't care who detects what and doesn't detect what, right? Like for half of my arguments, it's not, or more, it's not what I'm even going to mention. It's the purpose of the thing, right? And EDR's purpose is usually to like tell you right away what something is. They're not going to be providing like verbose logs or metadata, right? Things that allow you to make a decision. So like what is malicious, what EDR is going to like, if I add just a backdoor account in a domain, right? Or what EDR is installed on people connecting to your web servers? Like, do you have users with phones? Do you have ATMs? Do you have industrial control system devices? Do you have devices? Probably. This is my favorite. You know, as provide like showing value, because I was going to say like in this industry, like half the time to get anything done, you know, you got to educate people on why, right? Whether you're a business or even just, you know, working within a SOC or trying to defend a company. But I can almost guarantee you that there's plenty of systems that they don't have the EDR installed on. Never seen a complete inventory, probably never will. You know, that's why they dedicate millions of dollars and tons of people to it. But sitting off the network, right? Like if that device communicates, sends a packet, you know, that's going to be logged. So there's a lot of ways to tackle, you know, kind of that. Like an EDR just isn't designed to catch every scenario, like no data source is, right? But they're providing, they don't want to provide metadata majority of the time for you to make your own decision. Because they're not going to go and sell like, hey, you can make your own decision. Like that's not going to sell very well, you know? So basically kind of education, you know, on why metadata, unbiased, you know, Corelight Zeek data is necessary. I don't know if I beat a dead horse with that one or not, but.
No.
Yeah,
Excellent. Yeah, I was just gonna say, it looks like we're at the top of our hour here. It looks like we've answered the questions that have come in. Just wanted to ask, Andre, did you want to close us out with some closing remarks?
Yeah, I wanted to start a bit on EDR and NTA, but just probably a quick one that, you know, attack is pretty much the data gets to a system and there is a change in the system, right? If you think very high level, and like you can talk forever about EDR, but the data is going to travel. So if you're capturing the network telemetry, you will capture the data. But the stories where EDR agent gets disabled and you pretty much lose visibility, that's like not a rare story that happens, right? But again, I agree with Nate, like whatever I can get the signals and telemetry, like network, host, cloud, you know, give me all the signals, right? As long as I have people and tools to process them. And yeah, I'm talking about people and tools. I'm not talking about algorithms anymore because, you know, with Sigma pretty much becoming de facto standard for queries and detections, we always have an algorithm, right? You can find it on GitHub, you can find it at SOC Prime, you can find it in certs, you can find it in internal SOC teams, right? So the most important part is that the algorithms are shareable and human readable, right? And I think that's why we are even in this industry. We are trying. It's pretty much providing collective defense and ability to rapidly deploy the capabilities. So yeah, that's maybe a closing remark and comment on EDR and go in one.
There you go. That works. Excellent. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. I'd like to thank our presenters for joining us today. Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Nate. And thanks, James, for sharing your expertise with us today. Everyone that's signed up and attended, we will be sending out a recording of this webinar if you'd like to share this or rewatch with your colleagues. And with that, we'll go ahead and say goodbye. Have a great weekend, everyone, and thanks for attending.
Have a good weekend. Take it easy.
Cheers.